Early in the morning, at Atlanta International Airport, sunlight streamed through the massive glass panels, scattering across the marble floors like hundreds of shimmering light beams in motion. In a secluded corner of the restricted area, reserved only for pilots and airline personnel, a 16-year-old black teenager sat quietly on a leather chair, his eyes fixed on a TV screen playing a documentary about the history of commercial aviation. His name was Marcus Brooks, and the badge hanging from his neck, emblazoned with the West Air logo and the words Student Aviation Program. Guest access was his first ticket to a world he had only ever dared to observe through his bedroom window for years. For most, today was just another ordinary day. But for Marcus, this was the day his dream took flight. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood in Georgia, Marcus had never had access to planes flight training or seminars, but he possessed something no school or amount of money could substitute: a burning passion for the sky. Since he was just 6 years old, he could distinguish plane models by the sound of their engines draw detailed cockpit layouts from memory, and each night would gaze at the twinkling dots above as if they were guiding stars. Today, for the first time, Marcus sat in a room he once thought existed only in textbooks. Walls adorned with medals, flight maps, and distant radio chatter filled the space, each detail making his heart race. He had done nothing wrong. He was waiting for his assigned mentor, Ms. Tanya, from HR, to return after stepping out to take a phone call. But in that moment of peace, the door suddenly swung open, and the heels striking the marble floor snapped Marcus back to reality. A white woman stepped in. Her pilot uniform was pristine, 4 golden stripes gleaming on her shoulders under the ceiling lights. Her eyes were sharp, like a radar locking on target. She froze, staring at Marcus as if unable to believe what she saw: a black boy sitting in the pilot's lounge. Her furrowed brow instantly strangled everything: the light, the sounds, and the soaring dreams inside Marcus's mind. Without any greeting or inquiry, she spoke in a voice cold as sleet. "What are you doing here?" Marcus stood up, polite and composed, pointing to the badge on his chest. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Brooks. I'm part of West Air's Student Aviation Program. Ms. Tanya Davis from HR brought me in and told me I could wait here, but the woman didn't listen or didn't want to hear." Her eyes locked on Marcus like he was a threat, not a student in a legitimate program. "This room is not for kids to fool around, especially not those with no business being here," she said, then reached for her walkie-talkie. The ID badge in Marcus's hand trembled in sync with his heartbeat, and in his eyes, once bright with hope, uncertainty began to flicker. Was it possible that for some people, dreams and passion still had a color? "You didn't hear me leave." Now, the voice of Captain Amanda Wright rang out like a military order. In that moment, it was no longer a matter of a student standing in the wrong place. It had become a cold confrontation between privilege and presence. Marcus stood frozen, not understanding what was happening. He didn't yell, didn't get angry, hadn't done anything wrong. He was waiting for his guide to return, but Amanda's eyes stared at him as if he were a dangerous intruder. "I have an ID," Marcus said, his voice trembling but still polite. "Ms. Tanya brought me in. I was watching TV waiting for her." Amanda didn't respond. She stepped forward with swift, rigid movement and suddenly snatched the badge from Marcus's neck. The lanyard snapped off with a cold, harsh click. She flipped the badge over, glanced at it, and declared coldly, "Fake ID." "I knew it. One look and you can tell it's not valid." Marcus felt as if he had been slapped. "No, that can't be. I was issued this badge this morning," but he didn't get to finish his sentence. Amanda had already picked up her radio and spoke clearly into it. "Security. I need immediate assistance in the pilot lounge." An unauthorized individual is using a fake ID to access the restricted area. This may be a serious security breach. Everything happened so fast that Marcus couldn't even react. He stood in the room known as the sanctuary for those who command the skies, and now he was being treated like an intruder. Employees passing by in the hallway began turning their heads. Suspicious, cautious stares poured in. The room suddenly became a stage, and Marcus was cast as the accused unwillingly. Swallowing hard, he tried once more. "Please, ma'am, I didn't forge anything. I haven't done anything wrong." But Amanda cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "You think we're all fools. Someone like you doesn't belong here. You're in serious violation, and you will be held accountable." In the chaos beginning to unfold, Marcus didn't know what to do first. Defend himself, cry, or run. But the only thing he did was stand still, his eyes reddening with restrained rage. And deep in his chest, a question began to echo like an engine rumbling low. If your skin were lighter, would they be willing to listen? Just minutes after Amanda's call, two security officers appeared, uniformed and stern at the pilot lounge door, as if dispatched to handle an emergency threat. One tall with salt and pepper hair entered first, scanning the room before locking eyes on Marcus. The trembling black boy in the center ID ripped from his neck, his face a picture of disbelief. "Are you the one who was reported?" the officer asked, not harshly but firmly. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, sir. I'm Marcus Brooks. I'm part of West Air's aviation career program. Ms. Tanya Davis from HR brought me here this morning. I was waiting." "Do you have any identification?" the officer asked again, his expression devoid of sympathy. Marcus reached into his pocket, hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the wallet. He pulled out a student ID card and a printed copy of the program invitation on official airline letterhead. The officer glanced at the documents, but when he turned to Amanda, all hope drained from Marcus's face. "I've worked here nearly 2 decades, Amanda said, her tone confident and icy. "And I've never seen a student allowed in the pilot lounge unsupervised. Look at that fake badge. We can't afford to ignore potential threats like this, especially during sensitive times." Those words landed like a hammer on Marcus's trust. He turned toward the people standing behind the pilot's engineers and airport staff, all in uniform. None of them spoke. No one stepped forward to verify what he said. No one called Tanya Davis. No one asked him the most basic question, "Do you need help?" Those indifferent, suspicious, detached eyes stabbed into Marcus's heart like hundreds of needles. He felt small, exposed, utterly alone. Every breath caught in his throat. A whisper rose from behind. Someone muttered, "Kids these days think they can go wherever they want." Another sighed, "That skin color, no surprise there." Marcus clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms until they broke the skin. But he remained standing. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He stared straight at the officer with the most unwavering eyes he had ever mustered. "I didn't forge anything," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "I'm just trying to follow my dream. I don't deserve to be treated like a criminal just because I'm black." The entire room fell silent, but it wasn't the silence of compassion. It was the silence of a society too accustomed to watching in silence. Marcus stepped back just beyond the officer's reach. He pulled out his phone, his voice trembling like wind strumming a wire. "Please, let me call my dad. He can verify everything. I don't want to be dragged away like this." The officer looked at Marcus for a few seconds, then nodded. "Make it quick." Marcus dialed instinctively. His hand shook so much that the touch screen misregistered his inputs. Finally, the phone rang, each tone slowly and steadily, like time was torturing him. Meanwhile, Amanda Wright folded her arms, circling behind Marcus as if overseeing a dangerous criminal. She sneered, her voice loud and bitter. "Go ahead, call him. But I doubt your daddy can do anything. If he works at this airport, I recommend he be fired for letting his son cause a disturbance in a secure zone." Silence returned to the room. No one objected. No one scowled at Amanda. Only Marcus stood there, each of her words sinking deep into his bones. The phone kept ringing. No one picked up. He stared at the screen, eyes filled with desperation, then looked around the room as if hoping someone would speak up, would say to Amanda, "That's enough." But all he saw were turned faces, averted eyes, or quiet judgment. Marcus wanted to scream, wanted to shout that he wasn't at fault. He was invited here because of his merit and dedication. But his mouth was dry. He couldn't form the words. His hand gripped the phone tightly, as if it were the last tether to a dignity being stripped away. And then the ringing stopped. A deep, familiar voice came through Marcus. "What's going on, son?" In that moment, Marcus nearly collapsed. His lips trembled, holding back the flood of tears. "Dad, they said I broke in. They said my badge is fake. They don't believe me. I don't know what to do anymore." There was silence on the other end. Then the man's voice returned, calm, clear, and unwavering. "Don't be afraid. Stay right where you are. I'm coming." Short. No anger, no panic. But in every syllable was the weight of a father and a powerful man, ready to protect his child with everything he had. Marcus hung up, trying to stay composed, though his eyes shimmered. Amanda scoffed deliberately, speaking loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Oh, had to call Daddy after all, huh? Kids like you should know your place from the start. It would have saved everyone the trouble." A few people chuckled. A few others shook their heads, not in protest, but as if silently agreeing with her. Marcus didn't react. He just looked at her for a long time, and in that gaze was a pain beyond measure. But beneath that pain, something else began to stir, a wounded pride that would never bow. He whispered to himself, "Dad is coming, and the truth is coming with him." As the security officers stood, watched, their eyes alert, ready to escort him. At any moment, Marcus dropped heavily into the cold leather seat. His eyes stared blankly at the polished stone floor, reflecting his image as a trembling teen isolated in a room once hailed as the sanctuary of those who master the skies. But then, like a hairline crack breaking through thick ice, memories slowly crept in, pulling Marcus back to the early days where it all began. He remembered it vividly. It was his 6th birthday. The sky that day was as clear as glass, and his father, Jonathan Brooks, who had just been appointed a senior manager at the Federal Aviation Administration, took Marcus to Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. as a surprise gift. When Marcus stepped out of the car, in front of him stood a massive Boeing 777 towering like a mythical creature. The little boy stood still for minutes, eyes wide open, tiny hands clinging tightly to his father's coat, his mouth nearly speechless. "What do you think?" his father asked, his eyes gleaming with pride. "It looks like a giant metal bird that can fly," Marcus exclaimed, and both father and son burst into laughter. From that day on, the sky was no longer a distant space. It became a promised land where Marcus longed to reach with his wings. Every night, he made himself memorize engine sounds, pasted airplane models all over his walls, and flipped through pages on aeronautical mechanics again and again. His father, swamped with reports and emergency meetings, always made time to sit with him, explaining aerodynamic principles in simple terms, resting a hand on Marcus's shoulder and saying, "You'll fly one day, Marcus. Not just with metal wings, but with your belief in yourself." In 8th grade, Marcus began using flight simulation software. He practiced landing in turbulent weather and carefully took notes on emergency protocols. Many nights his mother would knock on his door reminding him to sleep, but his father would stand at the doorway, nodding silently at the boy wearing headphones, immersed in silent training. Every time Marcus messed up, his father never scolded him. He only asked, "How will you handle it differently next time?" Then came the opportunity. West Air's pilot career orientation program opened for applications. Marcus spent 3 weeks writing a personal essay over 3,000 words, recounting his journey every moment with his dad at the airport and why the sky was the only place he truly wanted to live. He didn't know how many times he reread the draft. He only knew that when he clicked send, his hands trembled like releasing a paper plane into the wind, unsure whether it would crash or soar. When the results were announced, Marcus didn't dare open the email. His father held the phone and read the words aloud. "Congratulations, you have been selected for West Air's Pilot Experience program." Marcus couldn't remember how hard he cried. He only remembered his father's arms wrapping around him tightly, his deep voice whispering, "This is the first step, and there will be many skies ahead." Now, sitting in that cold room, surrounded by judgmental eyes, Marcus closed his eyes. Not to forget, but to remember, because if he stopped believing in his dream, who else would believe in it? If he gave up now, what would all those years of effort become? In his heart, his father's voice echoed again, each word sharp and urgent like a breaking news alert. "No one has the right to stop you, unless you stop believing you can fly." Marcus opened his eyes, and he breathed evenly for the first time since everything began, not because the fear had gone, but because his faith was returning. His father was on his way, and his sky, though clouded for now, was still out there waiting. Heavy footsteps from the security officer grew louder with each second. Marcus had just slipped from the memory of years spent building a dream when reality came crashing down like a storm. The salt and pepper head officer said, his gaze sharp, "If you don't hand over your badge and leave this area immediately, we'll treat this as resisting an officer." Marcus's chest tightened, not from fear, but from feeling forced to confess to something he didn't do. I already said." Marcus tried to keep his voice steady. "I didn't break in. I was brought here by Ms. Tanya Davis from HR. She can verify it. I didn't do anything wrong." The officer tilted his head as if considering, but then turned to Amanda Wright, signaling for the final word. Amanda didn't hesitate. She folded her arms, standing like a courtroom judge, eyes hardened. "I don't care what he says. In my 20 years here, no student has been allowed alone in the pilot lounge. One look at that badge and you know it's fake. Best take him in for further inspection, and do it quickly. Aviation security is no joke." Her words dropped into the room like stones smashing Marcus's confidence into shards. He swallowed hard, his lips pressed so tight they bled. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his student ID and the program invitation copy. He raised them with trembling hands, not out of fear of being caught in a lie, but from the shame being compressed to the breaking point. Even those official West Air documents couldn't thaw the coldness in the crowd's eyes. The airport staff and passing pilots didn't look at him like a misunderstood teen. They looked at him like a question mark, like a system error. Someone pulled out a phone and started recording, not to help, not to vindicate, but to post online, to watch, to gossip. Marcus felt torn apart in a room full of people who didn't truly see him. Inside, the only thing still intact was his father's voice echoing from memory. "No matter what happens, hold on to your dignity, never bow your head, never cry in front of those who want to see you fall." Marcus clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop his heart from pounding. Rage held tight beneath the surface. He drew in a deep breath, then spoke one last time like a plea before all control was lost. "Please, I'm just a student. I'm not a threat. I didn't violate anything. Please call Ms. Tanya Davis. I don't want to be taken away like a criminal just because I'm wearing a hoodie and my skin looks like this." But Amanda had run out of patience. She stepped forward, her voice rising, high words struck like a sentence of execution. "Calling your daddy won't help. Airports aren't places for emotions or morality. This is about security. And even a 1 in a million chance of error could cost hundreds of lives." She turned to the officers. "Take him out. Now." The two uniformed men moved closer, standing on either side of Marcus as if ready to cuff him. No one in the crowd spoke, not a single person. Marcus stood there in a room that had turned silent and cold, feeling every ounce of air being sucked from his lungs. Everything he'd ever believed that effort would be recognized, that dreams didn't come in colors, now felt like an illusion. But just as the officer's hand touched his shoulder, one of their phones rang. The sound broke through the suffocating silence like a thunderclap in reverse. One officer answered, listened for a few seconds, then his face changed completely. He turned to his partner and whispered something that made them both stop. Marcus couldn't hear what was said, but the seriousness in the officer's eyes, the sudden shortness of breath, said everything. And then nothing in the room could have expected happened. The door to the pilot lounge swung open, not from urgency, but from the presence of a commanding force that seemed to sweep through the space like an invisible gale. Footsteps followed, measured, firm and thunderous, like the drumbeats of a verdict about to be delivered. Everyone turned. And there in the doorway, like a figure stepping from the heart of a triumphant symphony, stood a middle-aged black man in a sharp grey suit, wearing the official badge of the Federal Aviation Administration on his chest. The white ceiling lights glinted off his glasses, hiding his eyes, but his face was unmistakably clear, calm, sharp, and needing no introduction. Marcus held his breath. He recognized that silhouette immediately. He could never mistake it among thousands. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling like wind brushing stone. Jonathan Brooks, executive director of the FAA, didn't look around. He walked straight toward Marcus, his unwavering eyes locking onto the boy, still shivering in the center of a storm built from prejudice and abused authority. He placed a hand gently on Marcus's shoulder, a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of a mountain. Then he turned to face Amanda Wright. The crowded room fell into dead silence. Every eye, including those of the two security officers, were fixed on the man who had just walked in, as if all the air had been sucked toward his gravity. "Apologies for the interruption," Jonathan said, his voice deep, clear, and resonant like a bronze bell. "I'm Jonathan Brooks. The young man you are attempting to remove is my son Marcus Brooks, a student officially accepted into the West Air Career Orientation Program. I'm not here as a father. I'm here as the individual ultimately responsible for safety and ethics in the aviation industry of the United States." A wave of murmurs rippled across the room. Once a figure of icy authority, Amanda Wright took a step back, her face stiffening. I didn't know. He was your son," she stammered, trying to hold composure. But her voice was already cracking with fear. Jonathan didn't blink. His tone sharpened, each word slicing through the silence like a spear. "That's not the point. If this boy weren't my son, would the insults, suspicions, and prejudice you just unleashed on him be justified?" No one answered. Amanda bowed her head. The whole room stood motionless, as if staring into a mirror that revealed their silent complicity. Jonathan turned to the security officers. "You were about to escort a student from this facility without verification based on an accusation with zero evidence. Is this how we uphold security protocol?" The two men lowered their heads quickly, faces flushing with shame. One muttered, "We're sorry, sir. Don't apologize to me," Jonathan replied. "Apologize to the boy who had to endure this because his skin didn't match your imagination of what a dreamer should look like." Marcus stood frozen. He couldn't say a word. The tears finally came not from pain, but because his father's presence felt like the sun tearing through a storm. This wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a return to dignity. Jonathan Brooks stepped to the center of the room, turning toward everyone who had stood by in silence, who had witnessed, doubted, and said nothing. "I hope," he said, his voice ringing out, "that what happened today becomes the most expensive lesson in your careers. Because if even a teenager with a clear record, an official program, and no wrongdoing can be doubted, insulted, and humiliated, then we are failing not just in aviation, but also in our humanity." The room was utterly still. Only Marcus's breathing, now calmer, filled the space. To him, his father was no longer just a man with a powerful title. He was the lighthouse in the middle of a dark, prejudiced sea. Just as the atmosphere strained under the weight of Jonathan Brooks' indictment, a technician from the FAA quietly entered the room carrying a tablet. He approached and whispered something in Jonathan's ear. The director nodded slightly, his eyes now like blades stripping away every mask in the room. He turned slowly and spoke, his voice lower but unmistakably clear. "I've requested a full retrieval of surveillance footage from inside the pilot lounge this morning, and I believe it's time everyone sees what happened." The technician quickly linked the tablet to the large wall monitor in the corner of the room. The space held its breath. Then the video played clearly, indisputably. It began with Tanya Davis, HR staff from West Air, personally escorting Marcus into the lounge. She smiled, showed him where to sit, and handed him a badge labeled Authorized Participant, Pilot Experience Program. She then left to take an urgent call from the administration. Throughout the footage, Marcus remained seated, did nothing suspicious, and focused solely on the TV material, just like a diligent, curious, and passionate student. Then came the footage of Amanda Wright entering the room. No questions, no ID check, no verification attempt. She immediately approached Marcus with hostility, tore the badge from his neck, and called security without a single step to confirm the facts. The room now fell into absolute silence. Amanda's earlier justifications evaporated frame by frame. Every gaze from pilots to staff now turned to her. She stood rooted in place, face pale as chalk. Jonathan spoke not loudly, but with a tone that didn't need to be. "I believe there's nothing more to discuss about what Marcus did or didn't do. Cameras don't lie, but we, those sworn to uphold safety and fairness, were the ones who rushed to judge a child because of a bias we didn't even question." It didn't stop there. The technician opened another file. At Director Brooks' request, he said, "We also reviewed internal reports regarding Captain Amanda Wright. And," he hesitated, "this is not the first complaint of discriminatory conduct." Amanda's expression collapsed in real time. "In the past 3 years," the technician continued, "there have been at least 3 official complaints citing favoritism and discriminatory behavior against staff and passengers of color. In all cases, the issues were handled internally, with no disciplinary action taken. Any defense Amanda had prepared was now ashes. She had no place to hide, no one left to speak for her, and worst of all, unsympathetic eyes remained in that room." Jonathan Brooks, still standing beside Marcus, said in a voice as cold as steel, I'm not here to humiliate anyone, but I will not allow anyone, whether wearing a pilot uniform or a federal badge, to insult my son or any child because of their skin color, their name, or where they come from." The room melted into a silence, not out of fear of authority, but because the truth had finally entered the light. Marcus said nothing, but something in his eyes had changed. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pride. It was a belief that for the first time in his life he saw justice, not as a concept, but as something real. The room remained engulfed in silence as the video ended. The truth had been bare, clear, and undeniable, like cockpit instruments illuminated under a pilot's overhead light. But now no one looked at the screen. All eyes were fixed on one person, Amanda Wright, the woman who once held her head high, giving orders and standing at the center of the room, as if she were the law and the standard now stood frozen like stone. Her lips pressed tight, her panicked eyes searching for an escape, surrounded by a circle of stares, no longer respectful, only disappointed and incensed. Jonathan Brooks took one step toward her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't tighten his expression. His very breath carried enough authority to freeze the room. He spoke each word heavy as a hammer. "Captain Wright, you did not merely fail to follow basic security procedures, you displayed a breakdown of professional ethics and, more gravely, a repeated pattern of discriminatory behavior." He turned to the FAA representatives who accompanied him. "I recommend immediate suspension of all flight duties and security access for Captain Amanda Wright, effective now, pending a full investigation into her professional conduct over the past 3 years." Amanda opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. No one spoke up for her. There was no applause, no gestures of support. She was left alone in the room where she once boasted her authority, now transformed into a courtroom without a gavel. 2 security officers approached, their voices polite yet firm. "Captain Wright, please exit the area and surrender your badge pending the investigation." Amanda slowly removed her nameplate from her uniform, placed it on the table like a discarded artifact, and walked out amid a silence so dense that not a single hand was raised, not a single goodbye was uttered. Marcus watched every step she took. His eyes held no hatred, only the calm stillness of someone who had weathered the storm. He didn't need victory, he only needed to be seen for who he truly was. He turned to his father, Jonathan, who had arrived not just as a father, but as a living example, squeezed his shoulder gently, nodding with a quiet pride that said everything. Then Jonathan addressed those who still stood watching. "I want this remembered justice doesn't come for revenge. It comes to correct, and correction doesn't end with punishment. It begins with changing how we perceive one another." He paused, scanning the many bowed heads. Not one person here spoke up. And that silence was complicity. "I hope that after today there will never be another Marcus walking into this place, forced to prove his worth simply because of the color of his skin." The room stayed silent, not from outrage, but because every word had struck home. A light had been turned on, not from above, but from within. Moments later, as the fog of discomfort began to lift like morning mist, an older black female pilot stepped forward. She introduced herself as Captain Olivia Grant, senior captain at West Air, with over 20 years of flight experience. She gently touched Marcus's shoulder and gave a small, respectful bow. "Young man, I'd like to invite you to visit the cockpit of the Boeing 787 I'm about to fly. Not to comfort you, but so you can see this sky still awaits those like you to rise into it." Marcus stood still, then nodded. The first faint smile of the day emerged on his face, worn with pain but now warmed by dignity. Jonathan looked at his son and gave him a silent nod, as if handing him the key to move forward, not through power, but through belief. Marcus turned once more to glance back at the pilot lounge, once his dream, once his nightmare, and whispered to himself, "I was not defeated. I stood my ground, and from today on I will fly not just in the skies above, but in the faith that no one has the right to take away." The cockpit door opened with a soft click, like the sound of a new chapter being unlocked. Soft lights from hundreds of buttons, monitors, and dials glowed onto Marcus's face, a face that had been through so much in one day, yet now beamed with a pure wonder, like the 6-year-old boy who once stood beneath a giant wing. Captain Olivia Grant smiled, motioning for Marcus to step inside. She stepped aside as though making room for a new generation. "Go ahead and take the right seat," she said softly. "That's usually for the co-pilot. But today, it's for someone who's earned it." Marcus stepped in cautiously, settling into the thick black leather chair. His hand rested lightly on the yoke. His eyes sparkled with respect and emotion. He didn't touch a single switch. He sat there, breathing in the space he'd imagined 1,000 times. "You know," Olivia said, her voice deep and warm like an engine rumbling to life, "the first time I sat here, I felt like you, nervous, overwhelmed, and carrying the weight of too many doubtful eyes. But like you, I didn't let anyone define me." Marcus looked up at her, eyes brightening. Olivia leaned over, pointing to the console beginning her tour. "This is the pressure warning light. That's the weather radar display. And this is where dreams take flight." Marcus listened carefully to every word, but in his heart, the real sound was something else, the heartbeat of a spirit finally healed. He thought of his father, of that quiet hand on his shoulder in that charged room. Jonathan didn't need to shout, yet he made the whole system listen. And now, because of him and the truth and resilience he brought, Marcus was here. No more explaining, no more begging. He existed. Olivia placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice like a legacy passed down. "You know what sets a pilot apart from ordinary people?" Marcus shook his head slightly. She replied, "When everyone else is panicking, you hold your course. When someone says you're not good enough, you don't argue. You fly higher." He smiled, a real smile. No more restraint, no more pain tangled with fear. That smile, small as it was the loudest declaration of all. "I'm still here, and I'm ready to fly." Marcus was no longer the misunderstood kid when he stepped out of the cockpit. No longer the insulted boy. No longer the one left to freeze in a cold, unwelcoming room. He was a survivor. He was a victor. And more than anything, he was an inspiration. The staff and pilots, who had once stood silent, now nodded as he walked past. A few patted his shoulder. Others whispered, "I'm sorry, I should have said something. Good luck." Marcus didn't respond. He nodded, his eyes shining, his steps steady, his shoulders lifted, as if walking a runway, preparing for takeoff. That evening in his office at the FAA, Jonathan Brooks sat before his computer, holding a handwritten note from Marcus. "Thank you, Dad. Not just for protecting me, but for teaching me that justice isn't in the loudest voice. It's in the truth that never wavers." Jonathan folded the letter, pride shining in his eyes. 1 month later, Marcus Brooks became the official face of the FAA's new Aviation Diversity Initiative. He began visiting high schools across the country, not to tell of the pain, but to share how a dream can survive and rise through the fog of prejudice. And from that day forward, the sky was no longer out of reach for kids like Marcus. Because now they knew someone who was once treated like an intruder could sit in the cockpit. Then their dreams too had a place in the endless air above.